Welcome everybody. We're going to talk about Beatles facts from January 13th through the years. Here's a whole bunch of important Beatles trivia facts, and they're all quite interesting. Such as, on this date in January 13th, 1963, the Beatles taped an appearance for the Thank Your Lucky Stars program. This was early in their career. They had just got their record deal. Love Me Do had just been a hit, and now they got to perform Please Please Me. It was taped in a lip-sync performance.
I own that, by the way.
Yeah?
I own the complete performance, yeah.
Excellent.
On film, yeah.
And this is a very historic gig for them because they got to show off their new song, which would become their first #1 song. So this was early promotion. And they also got to show some of their humorous personalities. And of course that would land up really paying off for them everywhere they went. You know, it was all about this humor. The Beatles were funny guys. And so weeks away from now, the Beatles would get their first #1 hit, and this would help towards them becoming household names in England. So that's quite a historic show.
And just to say, too, the Beatles were the first band from overseas to actually make that kind of an impact in North America. And a lot has to do with, like you just mentioned, with the Beatles' humor, because they were bombarded with questions at the airport, which everybody can see now on Ron Howard's new film 8 Days a Week, in color of all things, which is beautiful. But the media bombarded them with questions trying to stump them, and then come back with a snappy response, you know, this Liverpool kind of wit, and it was endearing, and I think that was a big part of the Beatles' persona, why they became so popular, not just with the kids but with everybody. So that's for sure. Also on this day in 1966, Ringo, Starr and John Lennon left England for vacation in Trinidad, of all places. So.
And that's interesting. You know, this is just, they just finished recording the Rubber Soul album, releasing it. It was #1 around the world. And now they're ready for a little break, starting off the beginning of 1966, actually on a holiday. So I guess, you know, two good friends at this time, just hanging out. Right?
And they remained good friends right up to the end, John Lennon and Ringo Starr. John Lennon was actually recording songs for Ringo on his new album, which was entitled initially Can't Fight Lightning, but changed to Stop and Smell the Roses after John was murdered, of course. So they were working together. I mean, all the Beatles were actually planning on working together again anyway, but that's for another story later on down the road. It was interesting. And Trinidad's a nice place. It's warm. Why not?
Yep. Yeah. Also on this date, on January 13th, in 1969, the Yellow Submarine soundtrack album was released in the United States.
Right.
It would become a #2 album, and the reason it didn't hit #1 is because the White Album had just been released, so the Beatles kept themselves out of #1. Interestingly enough, Yellow Submarine is my favorite Beatles album. I'm like the only Beatles fan on earth to admit that. But it's always been true. My favorite Beatles cuts are on that album, as well as I really like the George Martin soundtrack music on that, which I thought added so much to the movie, which also happens to be my favorite movie of all time. So there you go. Big attachment to that.
It's pretty cool, actually. You know, after all these years, it still holds its own, and it's a very unique album. Probably the least popular of all the Beatles albums at that time, but to this day, it's very, very unique. Also, they were in a year later, in 1969, they were in Twickenham Studios again, without George Harrison, of course, doing their Get Back project, which became the Let It Be album. There was a lot of problems going on at that time. I know Paul and Ringo were discussing the difficulty dealing with John because he had appointed Yoko Ono to speak on his behalf at that time. So it's very difficult where, you know, the unit of 4 people have now become 5, you know, and good or bad.
That's right. Now Yoko's speaking on behalf, and I think that's where the rumors come, where people say Yoko broke the band up. But I mean, it's just she's there. She's part of the deal, and it's interesting to think that they were actually jamming and trying to record basically as a 3-piece, since George was not in the band at this time.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's that. Also on this date, January 13th, in 1971, Yoko and John traveled to Japan so she could have her parents meet John for the first time, even though they'd already been married for 2 years. And they stayed at the Hilton Hotel in Tokyo under the alias of Fred Gherkin and Wife.
That is interesting. And also 1972, they make an appearance, the Lennons, on the David Frost Show. Did you know that? On this day.
And they promoted new political songs they had just released for their Sometime in New York City album, which did not do well with the critics or the fans. Nobody really wanted political stuff from John. This is quite a change for him, as he had just done this utopian peace anthem the year before, and now he's just talking about all the crap going on in the world, right?
That's true. John Sinclair, Attica State, Luck of the Irish. I mean, there's a couple of songs on that album right there. I wouldn't say John was out of touch. I think he might have been a year too late, because people are already starting to move away from that whole thing into the 70s kind of disco money period. You know?
Yeah.
So it's unfortunate. And also on this day in 1980, another new Beatle album hits the store called Hear the Beatles Tell All, which was basically George's sister, who created that album back in 1966 and re-released in 1980. So my dear friends, come back when you can.